Welcome back to the Power Series. Today we are going to be talking about the power of choice. And I love this dimension of power because I believe that our life can change based on one decision or one choice that we make. I want to ask you a few questions to start us off on this episode. Are you an indecisive person? Or does it often take a very difficult time for you to make a choice? Do you often find yourself agonizing over a decision that you need to make? Or do you constantly feel like your life is spinning out of control or like you don't know how to get a handle of your life? If you answered yes to any one of those questions, then I have good news for you. Today's episode is going to help you. I believe that choice is everything. Everything that we do is based on a decision. We choose whether we want to respond to certain things. Our emotions are based on a choice. Our actions, our thoughts. We choose what kind of student we want to be. We choose what kind of human we want to be. We choose what type of parent we want to be. We choose what kind of wife or husband we may want to be. So I believe that choice is everything. And I want to also talk about the definition of choice. So coming from etymolene.com, I hope I did not mess that up, choice is defined as an action of selecting, the power of choosing, derived from the modern French choisir, which means to choose, distinguish, discern, recognize, perceive, or see. Now, when I think about these particular words, distinguish, discern, recognize, or perceive, it reminds me that in order to choose or to make a choice, you actually have to engage your brain. That means you got to do some thinking. Fun fact, most of our decisions, about 90% of our decision making happens on a subconscious level. That means most of the decisions that we decide to do are not based on things that we're actually thinking about at a conscious level. And so oftentimes we may feel like things are just happening to us because we're not taking the time to take a step back and to actually think about what's going on. In a previous episode, I talked about the part of the brain that is actually the logic center. That's our prefrontal cortex. That's the front part of our brain that's actually not developed until we're around the age of 25. And so that's the part of our brain where a lot of our analytical sound decision is made. But for the most part, that's part of the brain that we tend not to use. And one of the reasons, and I've talked about this before, is actually trauma. What happens with trauma, as I talk about a lot, is that it actually keeps us stuck in a particular memory moment of time. And then it takes us time to really come out of that period of being unstuck. And so what happens is when we're stuck, we don't really use that part of the brain where we're making decisions and we're analyzing. And that's important when it comes to the power of choice. Most people, when they've gone through some level of trauma or abuse, they often feel like this sense of powerlessness. If you ever spoke to someone that may be dealing with poverty or might be dealing with some type of abusive relationship, they often feel like they don't have a choice. Like life is constantly happening to them. Like they don't get the power to choose, and oftentimes feel like this sense of powerlessness. But in reality, every person, regardless of what you have encountered or what you have gone through, you still have the power to choose. There's still a way to gain back your personal power. And it takes time because, again, when you're going through life and you're going through certain challenges, oftentimes life will make you feel like you don't got no power. You can't do nothing about it. You're always going to be this way. You're always going to be a loser. You're always going to be poor. You'll always be angry. You'll always be depressed. You're always dealing with anxiety. It's in your blood. You know, your mom was like that. Your dad was like that. Look at your life. It's always going to be that way. But regardless of where you are right now in life, if you don't like where you are, all it takes is one decision and making the right choices to help you get to where you want to be. So as I talked about, abuse and trauma is one of the major factors that may affect our choice, our ability to choose. And I want to also talk about a Harvard Business Review that I read that I thought was really incredible, that talks about unhealthy choices. And one of the things that was mentioned in this Harvard Business Review is that after we have experienced trauma, Our rationality, our ability to rationalize, is actually compromised and often overridden. Have you ever thought about a person that's just very angry, or they're always making decisions based on anger or emotions? Those people may have dealt with some level of trauma, and oftentimes don't feel like they have the control or the power to control themselves. We often hear the power of like discipline, like you got to have discipline. Many people may not feel like they can discipline themselves because they feel like they're succumbing to their emotions. That's when you're dealing with the subconscious. Your brain is sort of trained. I'm always going to react this way. So if I'm triggered, I'm going to yell. If I'm triggered, I'm going to melt down. If I'm triggered, I'm going to have a tantrum, or I'm going to bully or threaten, or whatever it is, or I'm going to go into myself, or I'm going to isolate. This is when we're making decisions based on our subconscious. My goal by the end of this episode is to get us to identify when that is happening, and then to be able to utilize these 3 techniques that I'll talk about at the very end. The other thing that trauma does is actually it engages our emotional brain. And I talked about this in our prior episode again. That is our amygdala. That's the part of our brain where, again, our traumatic memories are stored. And so when we're dealing with being emotional all the times, or we're just making decisions based on emotions, we're actually engaging our emotional brain. So I'll give an example, and I don't want to make you laugh, but we think about like what happened with Will Smith, that big slap, right? That was based on what? That was based on some type of engagement of the emotional brain. Perhaps there were some other things that Will Smith had been dealing with, such as rage, or maybe some sadness or depression based on what he had gone through, or based on a traumatic experience. So that's an example of how trauma can actually cause you to react in an emotional way, even if you really didn't mean to do that. Most people that are acting in rage and are angry all the time, and even if that's you, there's still good news. You can still choose how you respond to your emotions. You may not be able to choose the emotions that you have. Perhaps you are feeling angry or frustrated or disappointed, but you can choose how to respond. But it requires you to really take a step back and really reflect on what's going on. So these are the reasons why you don't want to make decisions based on negative experiences or based on trauma. Number 1, making these decisions or choosing to respond based on anger or trauma can actually hurt your relationships. So whether that's close friendships that you might have, maybe you find yourself that kind of person that's really difficult to get along with, or friends just cut you off or don't want to be bothered with you anymore, that might be some indication that maybe you're not making the right choices or decisions. And I encourage you to talk to the people around you, and they will tell you, hopefully, the truth. Or perhaps you might damage a romantic relationship. Maybe you're the kind of person that's just back and forth between romantic partners, but you can't really seem to find yourself in a stable relationship or place. That also may be a result of making poor choices based on trauma. Number 2, when you're making those type of decisions based on your emotions, you're actually, again, you may not be making the decisions that you really intend to make. Have you ever got into an argument and you had a big blow up, and then you just yelled and cursed at the person, and you probably, hopefully not, but hit them, and then you take a step back and you're like, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to say those words, right? Because your true self, your most authentic emotions are not really conveyed properly when you're making decisions in an emotional moment. Number 3, decisions based on anger, reacting out of anger, actually, again, it doesn't show your discipline, right? You may just lose a sense of control. You want to gain your control back. You want to get back control of yourself, of your actions, and actually be in control of what you're doing. Remember, you have the power to choose. Also, decisions based on fear. This is a huge one. Fear drives so many people decisions today. So many people are dealing with fear, and anxiety. And based on that fear and anxiety, you might actually miss out on life, on happiness, on fulfillment, on good relationship, because you're making decisions based on that subconscious level of fear. And maybe you don't know that it's happening. Maybe you haven't recognized it. Maybe you're not even aware that it's going on. But if you actually, again, start to go through these reflective moments, then you start to bring that stuff to the conscious, part of your brain. And then again, decisions based on hurt and pain. This is when you want to avoid not making these decisions. If you're dealing with some form of pain or hurt, maybe someone hurt you, hurt your feelings, or broke your heart, you don't want to make a rational decision based on that, especially if you're making a decision to be vindictive or to harm someone else or to get vengeance, which is huge, right? Sometimes I want to get my hit back in, like, you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. There is a saying, hurt people hurt people. And it's so true. What happens? Why do hurt people hurt people? Because they're hurt and because they're making decisions, again, based on the subconscious, and they're not really taking a step back to think about how these decisions are going to affect not just the other person, but also themselves. So what we want to do is we want to start to make decisions based on our conscious level, based on our logical thinking. We're going to really reduce that number, 90% of subconscious decision making. Let's get that number down and start to increase the number of decisions we make based on our subconscious, our conscious. This will allow us to check for projections and perceptions. I actually teach about this in a leadership training that I conduct, where we are all born with certain levels of perceptions based on our lived experiences, based on our upbringings. We have certain perceptions, and sometimes our perception is not right. Sometimes we really need to adjust our lens and be able to see things a little more clearly. And so sometimes we might make a lot of choices based on biases or based on something that I called confirmation bias. That means, for example, if you brought a red car, right, for the first time, and you're driving on the road, you're going to see all red cars. Why? Because your brain is now trained to see red cars. Be careful that you're not making decisions, especially in relationship, based on confirmation bias. You might need to adjust your lens a little bit. So another thing is when you are making choices based on your conscious, before you choose, you can go through an emotional audit. And this is something that I do, where I go through an audit and I begin to ask myself a set of questions. And it goes something like this: Shanequa, what are you feeling right now? Like, why are you angry? Did this person mean to say this? Where are these feelings coming from? Maybe it's not coming from that. Maybe your daughter really bothered you earlier today, and now you might be taking it out on your employee, right? So I really got to go through this emotional audit. And sometimes, depending on where you are in life, you may have to do it a little longer or a little more often than you may want to. But I think that's important because you don't want to be the person that's making destructive decisions and choices, and then you're looking at your life and you're dissatisfied, you're not fulfilled, and you're far from living the life of your dreams because you're not taking control over your decision making. Another thing that you want to do is avoid making decisions that are not from your heart. And oftentimes, if you are a people pleaser and you're just sort of wanting to please people, you may not be making decisions based on what you want solely. It may just be based on what that person wants. So this may be true for people that are very codependent or that may, again, just want to please everybody. You just want to say yes all the time. I remember doing that at one point in my life, just always saying yes. Shanequa, can you do this? Yes, 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 yes. I was just like the yes girl. And what happened was I became burnt out and very dissatisfied with life because a lot of things that I was doing and I was saying yes to, I didn't really want to. I was doing it because I wanted to make people happy and I wanted to please them. So you don't want to do that. You want to avoid being a people pleaser as much as you can. And it does take work. I know it's not just this one little episode, but it will take time and practice for you to choose yourself and to really evaluate, am I making this decision because I want to do this? Does it really reflect who I am, my value system, my heart, and what I love? Or am I making this decision because this person just wants it and I'm giving up my will for theirs? And so I want you to evaluate right now. Just take a moment and I want you to just start to think about your life and just your day-to-day decision making or your major decision making. I want you to think about these questions. Am I making decisions based on my trauma? Am I doing things to intentionally hurt people or to intentionally destroy other people? Am I doing things because it's in my best interest or because it's true to who I am as a person? How does my choosing or my decision making affect the people around me, the people I care about, the people I love, or just people in the world? How does my choosing also affect my workplace, places that I may serve? I want you to really think about that, because what you're doing now is you're analyzing, you're reflecting, you're thinking, and you're starting to engage the logic part of your brain, which is the part that we don't use enough. I also want us to begin to take accountability for our actions, so things that we've done. Maybe you've made some poor decisions in life. The great news is you have the power to choose from here on. You can take a moment, you can take a step back, and you can actually utilize some incredible techniques that work. Here's one. Pause. This sounds very simple, but there's actually something called metacognition, which is when you're engaging your prefrontal cortex. What you want to do is, before you make a decision, whether it's decision to respond to someone in a meeting, think, pause, take a step back, and I would recommend counting to at least 10 to 30 in your head before you actually respond. That now gives you a moment to not be emotional, but to really take a step back and say, okay, let me just think about this for a moment. Take time to think. Number 2, emotional audit. I go through this a lot, especially when I'm really upset. I'm like, those that know me and respect it, I'm like, let me just go through my emotional audit so that I can really center myself. It's important to be in touch with yourself and what you're feeling in order to do this emotional audit. And then lastly is reflection. Reflect on your decisions, on your choosing. At the end of the day, I like to, at the end of every day, I sort of go through like this reflection moment. And I also do it in the morning. And these might be called me moments. But what you want to do is take time to really reflect. Take a moment to think about your day. You know, it was a little heated in that meeting. Did I say the right thing? And that might be moments where you analyze yourself and you say, you know what? Maybe I didn't. This is also called self-awareness. It's really important in leadership. And so I recommend that you use these three techniques. Let me know how that works for you. But in ending and closing, I want us to say this affirmations, and if you can say it as I'm saying it. I have the power to choose. I'm in control of my emotions. I'm in control of my thoughts. I have the power to choose how to respond or how I respond. Life is no longer happening to me, but I am happening with life. And that is the end of our Power to Choose episode. I hope that was helpful. I hope you utilize those techniques. And I wish you all incredible happy holidays. We'll be back next week for the next dimension of power.